Culture, Context, and Teaching. My name is Alicia Lerma. Cultural responsiveness can be defined as the way one views their culture or identity as an asset to the individual. This can include, but is not limited to, their race, ethnicity, linguistics, or other characteristics the individual might possess. Using culture to build trust and relationship with others to improve the learning environment. When planning and implementing instruction, for planning, you're gaining insight on the student's individual interests, maybe through a teacher-student interview, creating and integrating real-world problems to help students connect, segmenting information and differentiating based on the specific levels or grouping that you are using within your classroom, and you're researching information and others, such as somebody in a different field of work, or somebody that can be helpful to or connect to a student's culture or their background that they are coming from. Sometimes it helps students to be able to see somebody that they can relate to, because that's not always the educator in the classroom. When implementing instruction, it would look like a lot of inclusion, relating to the students, using a lot of different groupings, changing the groupings frequently, having open classroom discussions to allow students to express their thoughts, their thinking process, ideas, to really reflect off of one another, exposing students to others that have similar backgrounds and cultures, so that goes with using your planning to research and information and other people that could be helpful to the student. Oftentimes it's implemented using a game-based learning. Students learn better when they're having fun and they're playing, and they don't really realize that their learning is happening. Using a lot of small group instruction, such as using learning stations or centers, where that student to teacher ratio is smaller. And ensuring that all students have an opportunity to share their ideas or their answers throughout the day. If multiple students have their hand raised, giving time to call on multiple students and not just one student. It's important for them to hear their peers and to be able to feel included and express their thoughts and ideas within the classroom space. What is passive learning? Passive learning is instructor-centered. It often looks like a lecture or direct instruction. It's typically digested the material through note-taking, rereading your notes, or through listening to the instructor give the content. It's a very surface level of understanding. There's minimal deep thinking exposure, so people aren't really being able to go back, really think about, be able to answer thought-provoking questions about what they're learning. It's very, here's the information, take some notes, retain it on your own. For ELLs, this doesn't allow that connection to what they're learning. There's no hands-on interactive engagement with the content, so it makes it very difficult for a student to engage and make that personal relationship in order for that information to have meaning and for the information to stick within that student's brain. It doesn't offer a lot of support through visuals or models or manipulatives because it is just usually a lecture or direct instruction. There's no moment where a student is working through an answer or working through information that they have just learned using those manipulatives or being able to show their work through a model unless they were just doing it on their own in a note-taking manner. It can be very fast-paced with little room to pause and ask questions. Typically, you're trying to get a lot of information out to the students within a short amount of time. And this can often be overwhelming for an English language learner. They're already struggling just understanding the language that's being used, so having to hear it, digest it, apply it, all while it's happening very quickly, it can just be very overwhelming for the student and can make the learner insecure in their learning and cause that shutdown and that quiet period that an English language learner is going to experience. Some effective strategies for English language learners are lesson structure and layout, really paying attention to how you are delivering your instruction, using all learning types, auditory, visual, kinesthetic. All learners learn differently, even English language learners. So really making sure you're incorporating those different types of learning within your lesson, using manipulatives such as graphs, charts, letter tiles, sentence stems. It often helps students to be able to see an example or to be able to see their thought process being worked through. Learning by doing, so something like a project-based assignment or a game-based assignment. Maybe you're working on letter sounds and identifying them through playing something as simple as bingo. Really engaging students in that small group environment can be very beneficial for all learners, but especially for English language learners. And then just ensuring that whatever lesson, information, or content you're delivering, there's some type of connection to the real world. They need to understand why they have to learn it, why it can be useful for them, how they can apply it in their everyday life. Another effective strategy for teaching English language learners is connecting to their prior knowledge, creating that link between personal and cultural experiences to the education that they're learning will really help them to absorb the information and be able to apply it. The worst thing is for somebody to learn something and then not ever get to use it. So really taking that information and being able to apply it into real world scenarios can help them grasp the English language so much better when they have that meaningful connection to what they're learning. And then using the knowledge of their cultures to influence learning in the classroom. Oftentimes there are certain practices in a culture that can be connected to English and English language learning, and being able to make that connection for them, help guide them in making that connection can be very, very beneficial for them. It can help them make a better connection with the curriculum. English language learners can't just memorize information. It really helps when they can understand it, they can connect it, make that personal relationship with their learning. What needs to be considered to effectively serve English language students? Definitely their home environment. Are the students' basic needs being met? Are they having food, water? What does it look like at home? Are there people that speak English? Are they only speaking their native language? This can impact a student's learning of English when they don't necessarily have somebody at home that they can practice with. They're only being exposed to it in one environment. They're not able to make that connection between home and school. Another thing to consider is their cultural practices. Is it offensive to look somebody in the eye? Is physical touch looked against at? Really just making sure that you're aware of the cultural practices so that you don't offend somebody, even by accident. It can really help in also establishing that teacher-student relationship when you're aware and respectful of their cultural practices. Another thing to consider is their phonemic awareness at home, and that goes to having access to English-speaking family or friends. Are they speaking their native language, such as Spanish, at home? The phonemes in Spanish sound different than in English, and so just being aware of what they're hearing at home and what they're absorbing and how that can impact what they're then learning in English at school. Another thing to consider is their current educational background and supports that are being used. Do they have any background learning English, or has it all primarily been in their native language? Are there any supports that were being used that can now be used as they start to learn English? So really making sure you're grasping the whole picture of that student and understanding them so that you can then go and create a plan of action for that student that will really help benefit them. As a teacher, you have some responsibility. One is, I think one of the most important is to create a warm and accepting classroom environment. Without that, it's very hard for learning to take place when you don't feel welcome and accepted within that classroom environment. When students do feel welcome and warm and accepted, it helps them to open up, be more willing to try new things, really get out of their shell. Another teacher responsibility is supporting the home language and fostering that growth of a second language. You don't want the student to abandon their home language. So really making sure that you're actively doing your part in supporting the home language, but also you want the student to grow in the new second language that they're learning. Always advocating for the learners in the classroom environment, sticking up for the policy changes, and really just standing up for what's right. Respecting all learners and their cultural defined identity. This goes to creating a warm and accepting classroom environment. Making sure that you're incorporating student knowledge and creativity into your classroom practice. So if students have ideas or they have curiosity, really making sure that you're embracing that and integrating it into your learning and really fostering that idea of students being able to be creative and thinking on their own and applying what they're learning. Ensuring that you are knowledgeable about new tools and research that is pertaining to English language learners. There's constantly research and things that arise, new tools that are constantly being developed. So really making sure you're up to date on that kind of stuff. And then just being a model of culturally and socially responsive practices. And that goes to being active in the research and new tools that are coming out. Some new insight that I gathered after completing this assignment and reading through the text is that as a teacher, we may not realize how degrading and unculturally responsive something as simple as a letter home translated into another language can be. It doesn't have that personal touch because it's often being used with a translator processor like Google Translate, and so you lose that personal connection, and so having the English language learner in your classroom assist you in writing a letter can be a great way to turn it from being degrading and unculturally responsive to now it'll be proactive in building that student relationship or that parent relationship. Also, students feel important because they feel like they have this job and that they're being helpful and helping you communicate at home, and that you're taking that initiative to learn about them and their culture and foster that relationship with their parents. So it can be very beneficial. And this was just something that I learned as I read through the chapter. As it's also something I do is I use a translator with my home letters. And so now after reading this, it kind of makes me think about how can I not be so impersonal with those letters home, as although that's not my intention, we just are unaware of how simple something like that can become unculturally responsive. And so just turning that around. These last two slides are just some of my references that I've used throughout making this PowerPoint presentation. Thank you for listening and have a great day.